under the night sky. Tensions between nuclear-armed neighbours India and Pakistan are once again on the rise. According to sources, Pakistan has successfully tested the launch of the Abdali weapon system, a surface-to-surface missile capable of striking targets up to 450 kilometres away. The launch, described as part of routine operational readiness, comes amid escalating fallout from a deadly terror attack in Pahalgam that killed 26 people, many of them tourists. In response, India has banned Pakistani-flagged ships from its ports and halted all imports from Pakistan. Cross-border shelling has continued for 9 straight nights, as India has also blocked several Pakistani social media accounts citing national security threats. Islamabad is now seeking international intervention, calling for a UN Security Council meeting and requesting help from Gulf nations. Meanwhile, India has urged the IMF to re-evaluate its aid to Pakistan as global powers, including China and the EU, call for calm. We now move to the Indo-Pacific. In recent updates from Australian polls, the Australian Electoral Commission has shared images online of ballot counting in the country's east, where polls have now closed. Australia's populous eastern states include the key cities of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, as well as the capital of Canberra. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese hopes to lead Labour to a second straight victory, something no leader has done in over 20 years. A recent YouGov poll puts Labour ahead, but rising living costs and nationwide housing crises are weighing heavily on voters' minds. Sydney remains one of the world's most unaffordable housing markets, and both Labour and Conservative coalition have rolled out promises to ease the pressure, adding to the complexity. Geopolitical uncertainty, fueled in part by US President Donald Trump, has crept into the campaign conversation. More than 8.5 million Australians have already cast their early votes, a major jump compared to the last election. As the final ballots are cast, the outcome could shape Australia's direction on housing, foreign policy and on economic recovery. We are joined by our guest today to discuss this further, Professor Matt Qvortrup, Australian National University located in Canberra. Thank you very much for joining us today. Professor Qvortrup, the housing crisis, this is central to voters' minds in Australia today. Would you be able to give us a synopsis of it? Why is this such an important issue to Australians going to the polls today?
Well, the short answer is I can't, because I'm not an economist, so I can't give you a chapter and verse on that. I'm sorry about that. But I can say it's the main concern, but I'm not an economist, so I can't comment on that.
My apologies. I want you to, Professor, if it's all right, if you can compare the two leaders, Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese. What have their campaigns been like? How are the country receiving them? Is there confidence in either one? And how is this election looking to end up?
It's a very sort of soft-spoken, quiet man with Albanese, and then we have a quite outspoken, maybe slightly populist man in Peter Dutton. And Peter Dutton is sort of probably on the right of the Liberal Conservative Party, and Mr. Albanese is on the sort of moderate left of the Labour Party. Mr. Dutton had previously aligned himself with Trumpian points of view, and he's had a pretty terrible campaign. I mean, obviously Donald Trump hasn't helped. And being aligned with some of the views that Donald Trump has expressed support for has not helped him. He's also had a number of gaffes. So on the housing crisis, he brought his son along to a launch of a housing policy, and the son, of course, was asked if he could afford a house, Mr. Dutton, who is a wealthy man himself, had to admit that he was paying for his son's deposit, which made him look out of touch with the common people that he claimed to represent. That was probably the first sort of own goal that he made, completely unforced error. He also had the misfortune of quoting the Indonesian president on a policy of having Russian bases there, which turned out to be a misquote, and the Indonesian president had never said anything like that. And it took a while for Mr. Dutton to admit that he'd actually kind of made up the story. So this, for Mr. Dutton, has been very much a, if you like, sort of Murphy's Law. All the things that can go wrong will go wrong. Whereas Albanese, who was a little bit behind in the poll at first, has been fortunate with the Trump situation. He's been fortunate that people have looked at the economic improvement on economic. There was a rate cut by the central bank not long before the election, which gave a sort of a boost to Labour fortunes. So it's been steady as she goes for Mr. Albanese. It's been a series of unforced errors by Mr. Dutton, and also one of the things he sort of talked about was sort of a Doge style. People can't work from home anymore. And the problem is that he was relatively unpopular with female voters, and a lot of the people who in the public sector have the jobs where you can work from home were predominantly women. So therefore, that backfired a bit, and a lot of female voters, which he really needs in order to win, have turned their backs on him. So while polls can be wrong, I think in this case we are looking a bit more like a Canadian-style election. Of course, Trump hasn't threatened to invade us in Australia yet.
Yes, and Professor Quarterup, that's what I want to focus on finally is Australia's foreign policy. How important is it to Australians, and who are Australians preferring to be Australia's leader on the world stage? What issues is Australia facing in regards to foreign policy?
There are a number of issues. Of course, there's the Middle East, which are broadly in agreement about. There is the relationship to China, and Mr. Dutton's quite hard line on China is probably relatively popular, but people are also pragmatic enough to know that Australia's leading trading partner is China. So I think Australia is not a world power really in any way, shape or form. It's a medium-sized power that has to find a way of I think Mr. Albanese used a surf expression. Sometimes you just have to dive down and wait till the waves have rolled over you before you get up and start surfing again. And that sort of that approach is probably the one that characterizes Australian foreign policy, steady as she goes. And Mr. Dutton has, with his statements about foreign policy, has probably proven that he's not quite the quiet force that Mr. Albanese has been.
Professor Matt Quarterup, thank you very much for joining us. We now move over to the Middle East, where the international community of the Red Cross has warned its humanitarian operations in Gaza could shut down within weeks if aid access isn't restored. In a statement, the ICRC said Israel's blockade is blocking food, medicine and critical supplies from reaching the war-ravaged enclave, home to 2.3 million people. The EU has echoed urgent calls to reopen aid corridors, demanding Israel lift its restrictions. Israel, which shut Gaza's crossings in March, insists aid is being exploited by Hamas. Aid groups counter that Israel's proposed military-led distribution violates international law and would worsen civilian suffering. Amnesty International has slammed the siege, calling starvation a war crime, and the WHO describes the Gaza crisis as catastrophic. The US, Israel are reportedly close to a deal to bypass humanitarian in aid distribution. Meanwhile, Gaza's Civil Defense Agency said that an overnight Israeli strike on the Khan Yunis refugee camp killed at least 11 people, including 3 babies up to a year old. We are now joined by Nasser Mashni, President of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network, located in Melbourne. Thank you very much, Nasser, for joining us. We've heard about this blockade for the past 2 months. The humanitarian aid that's sent by various agencies is being blocked by Israel. Israel, of course, citing Hamas as being the reasons to prevent that aid from going in. They claim that Hamas loots the aid. I would just want you to talk to me, Nasser, about the effect that this blockade is having directly on the lives of Palestinians.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Thomas. And I think very first thing we need to do is to completely, throw in the bin anything Israel says. It's beyond apparent now to everyone in the world that Israel lies every time they open their mouth. And that comes from the manufacturing of the consent for this genocide way back when, 18 months ago, 575 days ago, when they said there were 40 beheaded babies. There were systematic rapes. All of the lies that Israel said have been disproved. Today, what we've got is a situation where Israel says that aid is controlled by Hamas and Hamas is using it. It's just another lie. The lies are used to justify this genocide, justify the killing, the imprisonment, the hostage taking of the Palestinians. We talk about hostages. There are 2 million hostages in Gaza that are absolutely captive to this barbaric, racist, genocidal state. So what we really need to be talking about is how we hold Israel to account. There is enough aid now at the Egyptian border to feed Gaza for 3 months, and Israel's not letting it in. It's not letting it in because they want to continue the settler colonialist ideology that started in 1948, where they wanted all of the Palestinian land with no Palestinian people. The plan here is to make Gaza unlivable so that Gazans, Palestinians, are ethnically cleansed from their lands. What does it look like today? I saw images this morning of some emaciated children who have died of starvation. It's not just Amnesty International, but it's every human rights organisation. It's the United Nations that are charging Israel with using food as a weapon of war. It's a war crime. What should be happening is countries like India and all over the world should be holding Israel to account. We should be boycotting that country, we should sanction it, and we should be divesting from it. It must be held to account. You can't kill 2 million people like Israel's planning to do. Exterminating 2 million people like Israel is planning to, and just not be held to account. It's shameful.
Yes, and Nasser, the ICRC says operations could shut down in weeks if this blockade continues. What happens to hospitals and aid depots if that happens?
Well, there isn't a functioning hospital, Thomas. There isn't a functioning hospital. We saw a couple of weeks ago, Israel telephoned the operating room and said, you've got 20 minutes to clear the last functioning hospital emergency room in Rafah. And they bombed that room. The child that was being operated on ended up passing away in the street on a gurney. The hospitals aren't working. There is no school. No child has been to school in 18 months. Women have been giving birth with no pain relief. Cesarean sections being done on women with no pain relief. Children having limbs amputated and being given Panadol or Panadine, pills. This is just abhorrent that we're talking about this, that 2+ million people are being held captive. And that is just a microcosm of the actual situation in the whole of historic Palestine. Nobody's talking about what's happening in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, inside 48 Palestine. And Thomas, earlier on you were talking about Israel bombing Syria in a move to let the Syrian regime know that they need to protect the Druze. Israel wouldn't care 2 cents about the Druze in Syria. It's all about exerting their regional hegemony and making sure everybody understands who's the big guy in town. It's shameful.
Nasser, Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by many countries around the world. How do you respond to critics who say the focus should be on removing Hamas before humanitarian aid is allowed to flow freely into Gaza?
Oh, it's just an absolute furphy, and it's a distraction from the real present crimes that Israel's committing. Number one, there is no Hamas in the West Bank, and Israel is running rampant there. They've ethnically cleansed the Jenin refugee camp. They're in Tulkarm. The experience of a Palestinian citizen of this apartheid state in Israel is beyond imagining what that's like, and they talk about it being the only democracy in the Middle East. This has nothing to do with Hamas. This is about Israel extending its settler colonialist regime. They've always wanted as much Palestinian geography as possible with as little Palestinian demography. This is about land. It's about the resources of Gaza. It's about having all of Gaza with no Palestinians. When people talk about Hamas, what we should be talking about is the International Court of Justice ruling in January of last year that Israel was plausibly committing a genocide. And the 15 months since then, where Israel has rained unchecked 2,000-ton bombs on tent cities, killed over 200 of your fellow reporters, Thomas, over 200, close to 800 medical workers. 3 weeks ago, we saw the vision from a martyred Palestinian ambulance worker when they recovered his body, where he'd been videotaping the assassination of himself and his 14 co-workers before Israel buried those ambulances and those workers in a mass grave. They said that didn't happen. They said they were all Hamas, and then they said they'd investigate. Then they called us all anti-Semites for suggesting anything might be wrong with that whole investigation. And then they came clean and said, yeah, it was an operational error. We can't be believing Israel. This is a regime that continues to lie, to genocide and kill Palestinians.
Nasser Mashni, thank you very much for your insight. We stay in the Middle East now, where sirens have sounded in Jerusalem and southern Israel this morning after Yemen's Houthi rebels fired a ballistic missile towards the country. The Israel Defense Forces successfully intercepted the missile. So far, there have been no reports of injuries or damage. This latest attack is part of a recent escalation, with the Houthi group claiming responsibility for several missile and drone attacks over the past few days. The Israeli military has responded with air defense systems, but the Houthi rebels, who have continued to target Israel and have vowed to keep challenging Israel's security. The situation remains tense as the Houthis recently called for more attacks on Israel while they continue to defend their territory and their civilians. We are getting some breaking news coming in now. Israel's military says its forces are now deployed in southern Syria, vowing to prevent any hostile elements from entering the area or threatening Druze villages near the border. In a statement, the IDF stressed it is closely monitoring developments on the ground and stands ready to respond to a range of scenarios. This comes amid heightened regional tensions and growing concerns about cross-border instability. And we will bring you all breaking news developments in regards to Syria. We once again move back to Europe, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says US President Donald Trump's views have shifted following their meeting at the Vatican last month. Zelensky also rejected a 3-day truce announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin to align with Moscow's World War II commemorations, but stated that Ukraine is prepared for a full ceasefire. He added that Ukraine will not engage in tactical games to allow Putin to ease his international isolation. Zelensky said Russia is responsible for ensuring the safety of world leaders visiting for next week's commemorations in Moscow. Meanwhile, Russia launched a drone attack striking Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Drones slammed into a high-rise apartment block, igniting fires and injuring 47 people, according to local officials. Mayor Ihor Terekov reported on Telegram that drones hit 12 locations across 4 central districts. US officials have finalized new economic sanctions against Russia, targeting major banking and energy sectors to increase pressure on Moscow to end its war in Ukraine. These sanctions include state-owned energy giant Gazprom and key entities in the natural resources and banking sectors. These measures will be implemented if approved by President Donald Trump, who has expressed frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin's rejection of peace talks and a ceasefire. Former US envoy Kurt Volker said that Putin has been escalating the conflict, while Trump pushes for alignment with Ukraine to demand a full ceasefire. According to reports, the US could also enforce secondary sanctions on countries like China and India, which continue to trade with Russia and help fund the war. Let's now turn to the Indo-Pacific. Singaporeans are heading to the polls today in a closely watched general election, the first major test for Prime Minister Lawrence Wong since he took office last year. By noon, nearly 1.3 million people had voted. That's 48% of all eligible voters, according to the Elections Department. Wong cast his ballot just after midday, accompanied by his wife at a polling station in central Singapore. The first Singaporeans to cast their votes in the 2025 general election were those living overseas, beginning with voters in Dubai, then in London. They were followed by Singaporeans in the United States, who voted at 3 polling stations located in Washington, New York, and in San Francisco. The long-ruling People's Action Party, in power for 66 years, is widely expected to retain a strong majority. But with rising living costs and job security on voters' minds, opposition parties like the Workers' Party are hoping to make further inroads. Wong, who led Singapore's COVID task force, has called for a strong mandate to deal with looming economic challenges, including potential fallout from US tariffs on China. Polling starts at 8 p.m. Polling ends at 8 p.m. local time, with results expected to begin trickling in by midnight. US and Japanese trade officials held talks in Washington this week, described by the US as frank and constructive. But Japan struck a more cautious tone. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent praised Japan's engagement, but Tokyo was frustrated by Washington's refusal to discuss Trump's steep tariffs on cars, steel and aluminium. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the car tariffs absolutely unacceptable, vowing not to sacrifice Japanese jobs. Japanese Economic Revitalization Minister and trade negotiator Rokosei Akazawa said that the American tariffs are costing one Japanese automaker $1 million every single hour. Let's take a listen in to his official statement.
自動車メーカーは、ある社は1時間ごとに100万ドルずつ損が出ているという状況にあります。そういう意味ではこれ以上なかなか言えないんですけど、ゆっくり急ぐと。国益はしっかり守りながらですね、できるだけ早くウィンウィン、日米双方にとっていいような結論を出したいということで、全力で最優先で取り組んでいる。
At the same time, the US ended duty-free exemptions for low-value shipments from China and Hong Kong, impacting e-commerce giants like Shein and Temu. These packages will now face high tariffs of 145% or flat fees up to $200. The shift is meant to combat illicit goods like fentanyl, but it's also expected to disrupt international shipping and air cargo. Experts warn trade volumes may drop by up to 75% this year, and US Customs now face a massive enforcement challenge, with thousands of small packages requiring inspection daily. The US Environmental Protection Agency is set for a dramatic shake-up as the agency has announced plans to cut $300 million from its 2026 budget, reduce staff to levels like in the 1980s, dissolving its Research and Development Office. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin outlined the changes in a video message, saying that the move aligns with President Trump's push to reduce regulatory red tape and boost energy development. The overhaul includes restructuring key departments and cancelling billions in federal grants. The agency says it will now prioritise cybersecurity, emergency response and water conservation. But critics are raising serious concerns. The Union of Concerned Scientists says eliminating the EPA's independent science wing and folding it into policy offices will turn the agency into a political tool, ignoring evidence-based research. In the US now, 7 people have died in a collision between a tour bus and a truck near Yellowstone National Park. 8 others were also injured when the Chevy pickup truck and the van carrying 14 tourists crashed. The road was closed for 7 hours while emergency teams treated victims and cleared the crash site about 25 kilometers from Yellowstone's entrance. According to the police, an air ambulance flew some victims to hospital due to the severity of the injuries. Both vehicles had caught on fire, and as per Idaho State Police, 6 individuals in the van and the driver of the pickup truck died as a result of the collision. Police are still investigating what may have caused the accident. Now we stay in North America, where King Charles will travel to Canada later this month and deliver the speech from the throne to formally open Canada's 45th Parliament later this month on May the 27th. Prime Minister Mark Carney has said that this is a historic honour that matches the weight of the times. He stated that the King's visit clearly underscores the sovereignty of the country, which is a nod to Trump's 51st state remarks. He has also stated that Queen Camilla would join the visit. Here's what he said.
We will have the privilege of welcoming His Majesty King Charles III, who will deliver Canada's speech from the throne on May 27th. Her Majesty the Queen will join this visit. This is an historic honor which matches the weight.
Governor General Mary Simon has also issued a statement confirming the royal visit. The King is Canada's head of state and is represented in Canada by Governor General Mary Simon. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has confirmed he would meet the US President at the White House on Tuesday. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world. Thank you.